Mother went shopping but never returned. 14 years later, her family discovered why. The scene was a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, 2008. The fading light of a late spring evening danced across the simple but neatly kept houses, their lawns manicured and driveways dotted with the usual family vehicles. The Dorson family home stood in the midst of it all, modestly sized, with a welcoming front porch and a warm atmosphere that had once buzzed with the laughter of 5 children and their parents. But that evening, Catherine Dorson, 58 years old, mother of 5 and wife to Dan Dorson, stepped out to do something as ordinary as shopping. It was May 4, 2008, a Sunday afternoon, when Catherine, in her usual routine, told her family she was running errands. Her list was brief: some groceries, a couple of items for the household, and a visit to the local pharmacy. She kissed Dan, told him she'd be back in an hour, and left, but she never came back. The Dorson family's peaceful suburban existence was forever shattered that day. For weeks they tried to make sense of her disappearance. Her vehicle was found abandoned, parked along an isolated road miles from their home. The family held on to the belief that Catherine, for reasons still unknown, had run away, perhaps overwhelmed by the pressures of life. Yet as time passed, suspicion crept in, and the hope for answers began to dwindle. Dan Dorson, now confined to a wheelchair after suffering a stroke years later, never stopped hoping for closure. His children, ranging from 15 to 30 years old, each dealt with the loss in their own way. Ethan, the oldest, shouldered much of the responsibility in the years that followed. As a teenager, he'd stepped into the role of provider, helping to care for his siblings and later his father. Leah, Mark, Ellie, and Aldi, all of them moved forward, each battling their own scars, but none of them ever truly found peace. But now, 14 years later, a discovery would change everything. It was the first Sunday of June in 2025 when Ethan Dorson received the call that would alter his family's history. The voice on the other end was Detective Vans from the local police department, who had called to inform him that they had found something that could answer the question that had tormented them for so long. Catherine's car, the one she was driving the day she disappeared, had been located. It was submerged in a river. No one had ever thought to search there, not in all the years that had passed. The discovery was made during an unrelated investigation, but it was clear this wasn't just a coincidence. Catherine's disappearance wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random disappearance due to stress or an affair. Her family rushed to the scene where a new mystery unfolded. No body was found inside the car, but it was clear the car had been placed there deliberately. It was a haunting moment for Ethan, who immediately began piecing together the puzzle of his mother's life before her disappearance. The police had found items in the car, things that suggested Catherine had not been living the simple life her family had imagined. Her car had been parked, windows rolled down, as if it had been intentionally sunk to the bottom of the river. Among the personal belongings recovered was a photograph of Catherine, as well as a few items that didn't belong to her. The police revealed that just a few months after Catherine disappeared, someone had rented a warehouse under the name Elizabeth Carter, a name that struck Ethan like a hammer blow. Elizabeth Carter. His mother had never mentioned a name like that, and the warehouse, far from being a simple storage facility, seemed to have ties to some kind of operation. This new discovery didn't sit right with Ethan. This was more than just a runaway mother. This was a person who had vanished into a hidden life, one where she had to hide her identity and perhaps even flee from something or someone dangerous. The investigation into Raymond Doss, a shady businessman with known connections to illegal activities, began to uncover unsettling truths. Catherine had somehow become involved with his operations, and as Ethan dug deeper into the mystery, the pieces started to fall into place. Her disappearance, the false identity, the strange lease agreements, and the dark corners of her life that had been kept secret from the family. As Ethan confronted the implications of what he had uncovered, he felt both the burden of the past and the responsibility of the present. His mother had been forced into a world of deceit and danger, a world far removed from the ordinary life he had assumed she had lived. With the police now actively involved, the possibility of finding Catherine alive or otherwise seemed within reach. But the cost of finding the truth was something Ethan couldn't yet comprehend. Would they find her, or had she truly disappeared for good, leaving only shadows and unanswered questions behind? As the investigation unfolded, the Dorson family was forced to reckon with truths that they weren't ready to face. The search for Catherine would uncover not just the mystery of her life, but the secrets that had kept her hidden away for years. Ethan, now a man shaped by years of grief, guilt, and unanswered questions, stood on the precipice of a discovery that would shatter his family's last illusions. What he found would change everything, but in the end, would it bring them the closure they desperately needed, or would it reveal even darker truths that they were not prepared to confront? Stay tuned, because what began as a missing persons case has become something much larger, a web of secrets, betrayal, and hidden lives that reaches deep into the heart of the Dorson family. The moon hung low over the quiet streets of the Dorson family neighborhood, casting an eerie glow on the familiar row of homes. For over 14 years, the house where Catherine Dorson had raised her 5 children remained just as it had been, untouched, a silent witness to the family's heartache. But tonight the weight of years spent searching, questioning, and mourning was threatening to explode in the form of answers, however painful they might be. Ethan Dorson, now 32, sat in his dimly lit apartment in downtown Chicago, staring at the evidence in front of him. The old photograph of his mother, Catherine, had been recovered from her car, hidden beneath layers of mud and silt from the river where the vehicle had been found. The image was faded, but there was no mistaking the smile on her face. The woman in the photo was still his mother, the same one who had held him as a child, the same one who had left for groceries that fateful day in 2008 and never returned. It was an image of a happier time, one that in hindsight felt like a different life altogether. Ethan ran his fingers through his hair, his mind racing with the implications of what he had uncovered so far. His mother hadn't just vanished. She hadn't simply run away. No, this was something deeper, something far more sinister. The photograph of Catherine had been found alongside other items: men's sunglasses, a receipt for a transaction that hadn't been fully revealed, and a name that had started to haunt Ethan Raymond Doss. It seemed almost impossible to ignore the connection between his mother and this man, a businessman with a reputation for operating in the grayest areas of the law. Predatory loans, illicit debt collection practices, and accusations of money laundering all seemed to follow Raymond Doss wherever he went. And now his name had shown up in connection to his mother's disappearance. Ethan's heart ached as the realization began to set in. The life he thought his mother had been living, one filled with the normal struggles of a mother trying to raise 5 children, had been a facade. Catherine had been hiding something, and it wasn't just financial strain or personal stress. She had been involved with people like Raymond Doss, people who didn't hesitate to use fear and coercion to get what they wanted. The phone call from Detective Vans earlier that day had only deepened the mystery. The detective had informed Ethan that they had found more than just his mother's car in the river. They had found clues that pointed to a much larger operation. They had found items belonging to Raymond Doss's organization in the warehouse where Catherine had supposedly disappeared. But more troubling still was the discovery of a lease agreement signed under the name Elizabeth Carter, a name that until that moment had meant nothing to Ethan. The lease had been dated 3 months after Catherine's disappearance. That was enough to make Ethan's blood run cold. It wasn't just that she had gone missing. It was that she had left on purpose, or worse, been forced to disappear. And now the evidence was leading him down a path that he wasn't sure he was ready to follow. The lease was for a warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago, near the industrial district, a place that seemed far removed from the small suburban home where Catherine had raised her children. This wasn't a neighborhood for someone to run to if they simply needed a break. No, this was a place where people went to disappear. Ethan could hardly imagine his mother in a place like that, surrounded by men like Raymond Doss and his associates. But the more he thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit. His mind raced as he considered the timeline. The lease had been signed 3 months after his mother had disappeared, and it was clear now that she hadn't vanished on her own terms. Something had driven her to take this drastic step. But what Ethan's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Detective Vans. "Meet me at the station. We have new information." With his heart pounding in his chest, Ethan grabbed his keys and headed out the door. It was time to find answers. When Ethan arrived at the police station, the familiar cold fluorescent lighting of the hallway did nothing to calm his nerves. The sound of footsteps echoed as he walked down the hall past locked doors and empty offices. As he reached the interrogation room, he was met by Detective Vans, who motioned for him to sit. "I have some updates," Detective Vans began, his voice low and serious. "We've been looking into Raymond Doss and his son Harvey. We think your mother might have been involved with them in ways we didn't expect." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Involved how? What do you mean?" "There's more to this than just a woman running away from her family." Vans continued, pulling out a stack of papers and photographs. "We're starting to think that your mother might have been forced to work for Doss's operation. It's not just about loans or money, this is much bigger. There's evidence that points to her being coerced into a life she couldn't escape." Ethan listened, trying to process the words as they came. "So you're saying she was part of some criminal operation, possibly," Vans replied. "But we're not sure yet. What we do know is that she didn't just disappear on her own. She left because she had to. The question now is whether she was involved willingly or whether she was trapped." Ethan's mind raced. This was the moment he had feared, the moment when he would finally have to confront the truth. His mother wasn't just missing. She had been forced into something she couldn't control. But why? Ethan asked, his voice cracking. "Why would she do this? Why didn't she tell us?" "That's what we're trying to find out," Vans said. "We've also discovered some new leads. We think we might be getting closer to finding her." Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. "Coast Guard intercepts ship with ties to Raymond Doss." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "The ship," he whispered. "The Eastern Horizon." Vans nodded grimly. "The ship we think your mother might be on." Ethan's pulse raced as the weight of the situation settled in. This wasn't just about his mother anymore. It was about something much larger, something that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved, and he was at the center of it. The drive to the harbor felt like a blur. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. Could his mother really be on that ship? Was she alive? And if she was, what kind of life had she been living for the past 14 years? Was she a prisoner, or had she willingly joined this criminal world? As the harbor came into view, the vast expanse of dark water seemed to stretch endlessly before him. The flashing lights of Coast Guard vessels cut through the darkness, their searchlights scanning the horizon for any signs of the Eastern Horizon. Vans pulled into the harbor, and they were immediately met by a team of officers. The atmosphere was tense, everyone moving with purpose. A Coast Guard officer approached Detective Vans. "We have a visual on the ship," the officer said. "It's just off the coast, but it's moving fast. We're attempting to intercept it now." Ethan's heart raced as they boarded a police boat and headed toward the ship. The wind whipped through his hair as they cut through the water, the lights of the harbor fading behind them. He thought about his mother, where she was, what she might be going through, and wondered if he would ever truly understand the choices she had made. As they neared the ship, the tension on board was palpable. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. Would they find his mother? Would they bring her back? Or was this just another false lead in a lifetime of dead ends? In the distance, the Eastern Horizon loomed large, its silhouette barely visible against the moonlit sky. Ethan gripped the edge of the boat, his thoughts swirling, his heart racing. They were about to find out the truth. As the Coast Guard boat closed in on the Eastern Horizon, the night air felt thick, like the world was holding its breath. The waves slapped against the sides of the boat, rocking it gently as Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the towering silhouette of the ship ahead. Each passing second felt like an eternity. There, barely visible in the dark, was the vessel that might hold the answers to everything, the truth about what had happened to his mother, the truth he had been chasing for 14 long years. Ethan's pulse raced in his veins, each beat like a drum of impending revelation. Detective Vans sat beside him, his expression unreadable, focused on the ship ahead. Behind them, a handful of officers monitored the operation, moving with military precision. The quiet urgency of the scene was almost suffocating, as if every moment counted, every move was a step closer to uncovering something both devastating and redemptive. "Any word from the team on board?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might jinx the whole operation. Vans nodded slightly, his eyes scanning the distance. "We're still waiting for confirmation," he said. "But if your mother is aboard this ship, we need to move fast. The longer she's in their hands, the harder it will be to get her back safely." Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides, the cold air biting into his skin. "What do you think? Is she really on the ship?" Detective Vans glanced at him, his eyes meeting Ethan's with an unspoken understanding. "We don't know yet. But the fact that the ship's in this area moving this fast means something's up. We wouldn't be here if we didn't think there was a chance." Ethan nodded, the weight of the detective's words sinking in. A part of him had always known that his mother hadn't just left. But hearing it from Vans, hearing the confirmation that something far more sinister had been at play, made it all feel too real. The boat cut through the water, the eastern horizon growing larger and more imposing with every passing second. As they approached, the flashing lights of the Coast Guard vessels and helicopters reflected off the calm water, creating an eerie, surreal scene. It was as if time had frozen and everything had built to this very moment. Finally, the boat reached the side of the ship. The eastern horizon loomed above them, its rusted steel exterior battered by years of exposure to the sea. It was a cargo ship, large and utilitarian, not the kind of vessel you would expect to hold secrets. But Ethan had learned by now that appearances could be deceiving. The darkness of the night, the quiet hum of the water, seemed to wrap the ship in a shroud of mystery. A radio crackled to life on the boat, and a voice came through the static. "We've got eyes on the ship. We're moving in now. We'll secure the deck." Detective Vans immediately grabbed his radio, his tone commanding. "Copy that. No one gets off that ship until we've confirmed the passengers' identities." The boat slowly edged closer to the ship's gangway, and Ethan could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The anticipation was almost unbearable. What would they find once they boarded? Would his mother be there, or would this be just another cruel false hope? Vans turned to him, his face tense. "Stay with me. Don't make a scene. We need to stay low until we've secured the ship." "If things go sideways, I know," Ethan interrupted, his voice hoarse. Just find her." With a final look toward the towering cargo ship, Ethan stepped onto the gangway, his legs shaky as he followed the officers onto the deck. The sound of footsteps echoed in the silence, and the air smelled of salt and rust. The ship was a fortress, metallic, cold, and dark. The only illumination came from the lights of the Coast Guard boats and the occasional flash of the helicopter above. As they moved deeper into the ship's hold, the atmosphere grew heavier. There were no crew members to be seen, no signs of life. It was as though the ship had been abandoned, except for the faint hum of the engine in the distance and the eerie stillness that surrounded them. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. Suddenly, one of the officers ahead signaled to Vans. The detective moved quickly, signaling for Ethan to follow. They approached a set of metal doors, which led deeper into the ship. The officer pushed the door open cautiously, and the three men stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the faint glow from overhead lights casting long shadows on the cold metal floors. But then Ethan's eyes caught something that sent a chill down his spine. A row of old wooden crates stacked high, all covered with a thin layer of dust. The smell of stale air, mixed with the sharp scent of chemicals, filled his nostrils. Vans motioned for Ethan to stay back. The detective moved silently, his movements measured as he surveyed the area. His face was grim as he looked back at Ethan, a quiet signal to remain silent. But then something caught Ethan's eye, a small figure, huddled in the corner, barely visible in the darkness. His heart skipped a beat. He blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A woman. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Could it be? Was this his mother? The figure was slumped against the wall, her back to him. She looked thin, malnourished, even her clothes ragged and faded. Her long hair, once so vibrant now, appeared limp and unkempt. The room was silent except for the sound of Ethan's racing heartbeat. Mom, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman didn't respond. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes fixed on her. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He reached out, trembling as he moved closer. And then as he reached out to touch her shoulder, the woman turned. Ethan froze. The woman's face was gaunt, her eyes hollow from years of suffering. There was no recognition, no warmth in her gaze. Her lips barely parted as she looked at him, but all she said was one word: leave. Ethan stepped back, the blood draining from his face. This wasn't his mother. The woman's voice, though faint and strained, carried an edge of something that chilled him to the core. She wasn't just a victim, she had been hardened by this life. She was a part of something far more complex than he had imagined, something dangerous. Don't. The woman began, her voice hoarse, but she didn't finish. Instead, she sank back against the wall, as though defeated by the weight of the years spent in this place. The air around Ethan seemed to go still. The truth was more tangled than he had ever imagined. This wasn't a simple case of his mother being lost. No, she had been swallowed by something far more sinister. Vans moved forward, motioning for Ethan to step back. "We need to go," he said softly. "There's nothing here for you." Ethan wanted to say more, to ask the woman what had happened, what she knew, but the detective's grip on his arm was firm, pulling him toward the exit. "We're getting out of here," Vans said, urgency in his voice. As they made their way back to the boat, Ethan's mind raced. The woman on the ship, the Eastern Horizon, was just one part of the puzzle. But there were more questions now than answers. Why had she been there? What had she been involved in? And more importantly, was his mother still alive somewhere out there? The ship's departure felt like an unfinished chapter in a story that had only just begun. The answers were still out there, and the deeper Ethan dug, the more dangerous it became. But one thing was certain: he would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. The Coast Guard boat sped through the water, the wind biting at Ethan's face, as the dark outline of the Eastern Horizon grew smaller in the distance. The ship was still in sight, but now it felt like an impossible riddle, one that had only grown more complicated with each passing moment. Ethan's mind was reeling, trying to process what he had seen, or rather what he hadn't seen. The woman on the ship wasn't his mother, but she had been so close. The resemblance, the way she had looked at him, with those hollow eyes, it was as if she had known him. But that word "leave" had echoed in his mind long after the scene had played out. It was a warning, a plea, something deeper, something darker than just a missing persons case. As the boat cut through the water, Vans glanced at Ethan, his face stern, unreadable. He could sense the urgency, the raw need in Ethan's posture, but he also knew that this was no ordinary investigation. "What do you think?" Vans asked, his voice low. Ethan stared ahead, his hands gripping the side of the boat. "She wasn't my mom," he said quietly. "But something tells me she knows something. She's part of something bigger, something my mom got caught up in." The question is what Vans didn't respond immediately. Instead, he surveyed the horizon as though weighing his words carefully. "This case is tangled. Your mom wasn't just lost. She was involved in something illegal. The fact that she's tied to Raymond Doss's operations, that's a red flag." Ethan felt the weight of Van's words settle on his chest. Raymond Doss. The name had haunted him ever since the first hint of his mother's connection to the man had surfaced. Doss wasn't just a businessman. He was a criminal with ties to money laundering, debt collection, and worse. What had his mother gotten herself involved with? And more troubling still, why had she disappeared? "Do you think she's still alive?" Ethan asked, the words escaping before he could stop them. Vans looked at him sharply, his expression hardening. "I can't say for sure, but I don't think your mother just ran off. People don't vanish without leaving a trace, not without a reason. Someone wanted her gone, and it wasn't by her choice." Ethan nodded, his heart sinking. He had never been able to accept the idea that his mother had left on her own. The years of silence, the unanswered questions had gnawed at him in a way that no one else in his family seemed to understand. But now, with everything that had come to light, he was more certain than ever that there was more to the story. As the boat neared the dock, Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden radio transmission. "Vans here," the detective's voice crackled through the static. "We've got a lead." The officer's voice on the other end said urgently, "We found something on the ship. You need to come back and see this." Ethan's pulse quickened. He turned to Vans, who immediately switched the boat's direction toward the dock. "What did they find?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. Vans didn't answer right away. The boat sped forward, cutting through the choppy water, and the only sound was the hum of the engine. When they finally reached the dock, the Coast Guard officers were waiting. The tension in the air was palpable, and Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. What could they have found? Had they located his mother? One of the officers approached, holding a small sealed bag. "Detective, we found this in a hidden compartment under the floorboards near the cargo hold." The officer explained, his voice low. Vans reached out and took the bag, carefully inspecting the contents. It was a set of old photographs, water-damaged, but still recognizable. As the detective unfolded them, Ethan's eyes widened. The first image was of his mother. It was a picture taken years ago, long before her disappearance. She looked younger, vibrant, smiling. But it was the second photograph that took Ethan's breath away. It showed his mother with another man, Raymond Doss. The man was smiling, standing close to her almost possessively. Ethan's heart dropped. His mother had been involved with Doss personally. This wasn't just a matter of her owing money. It was something far more dangerous. "This changes things," Vans muttered, looking up at Ethan. "Your mother wasn't just involved with him. She was close to him. This is a deeper level of involvement than we thought." Ethan felt a chill wash over him. His mind raced, trying to process what this meant. Was this why she had disappeared? Had Doss and his people forced her to disappear to protect themselves? "What now?" Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion. Vans clenched his jaw. "We have to move quickly. This isn't just about finding your mom anymore. It's about uncovering what she knew, what Doss and his people were involved in. We can't let them cover this up." But there was something else in the back of Ethan's mind, something gnawing at him. The woman on the ship. She had said one word, but it had felt like more than just a warning. It had felt like a cry for help. "Detective, there's still more," Ethan said, his voice firm. "That woman on the ship, she knew something. She was there. She was connected to my mom. She might be the key to this whole thing." Vans looked at him, his eyes narrowing. "We'll need to check on her. If she knows something, we can't let her slip away. But we need to be careful. We don't know who's watching." Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'm not backing down," he said, his voice low but determined. "Not now. Not after everything." Vans gave him a hard look, but didn't argue. "All right. But this is going to get dangerous. You need to stay focused. Stay with me." As they made their way back to the Coast Guard base, Ethan's thoughts were a whirlwind. His mother, Raymond Doss, the woman on the ship. The connections were becoming clearer, but the danger was also intensifying. Whatever was coming next, Ethan knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to stop until he uncovered the truth. Whatever it took. He was closer now than he had ever been. The ship, the photos, the hidden truths, they were all pieces of the puzzle, and he was determined to put them together. Ethan's mind raced as he sat in the cramped Coast Guard surveillance van. its windows tinted dark enough to shield them from prying eyes. The weight of what they had discovered, the photographs, the evidence of his mother's connection to Raymond Doss, hung over him like a storm cloud. His family, his father, his siblings were unaware of the full scope of the danger. The detective had kept them in the dark, but the closer Ethan got to the truth, the more he realized that they were all in grave danger. The van hummed with the sound of radio static as the Coast Guard officers communicated with their counterparts at the harbor. Vans sat across from him, studying the latest information on his tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They're moving fast," Vans said, glancing up at Ethan. "The eastern horizon is heading further out into international waters. If we don't act now, we could lose them completely." Ethan clenched his fists. The possibility of losing his mother again, after all these years of searching, was unthinkable. He couldn't allow that to happen. The images of her, the waterlogged photograph, the woman on the ship who resembled her, they all swirled in his head. Was his mother alive? Had she truly been forced into a life she couldn't escape? Or was there something more sinister at play? "Do we have any other leads?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Vans shook his head. "No direct ones, but we know that ship has a direct line to Doss's operation. If we can get to the harbor, we might be able to intercept it before it makes its final destination." Ethan looked out the window at the sprawling port, the vast sea stretching beyond it. A chill ran down his spine. What had his mother gotten involved in? And if Doss was truly behind her disappearance, what kind of power did he hold to make her vanish for so long? Ethan could feel the intensity of the moment, like they were standing on the edge of something huge, about to be pushed into the unknown. "We can't wait any longer," Ethan muttered, already standing up from his seat. He moved toward the door of the van, eyes blazing with determination. Vans's voice stopped him. "Wait. Ethan, this is too dangerous. We're going in with a full team. You can't just rush in alone." "I'm not waiting," Ethan snapped. "I need to find her. I don't care what it takes." Vans met his gaze for a moment, sizing him up, then nodded grimly. "All right, we go together, but stay close. Don't do anything rash." The next few minutes felt like an eternity as the van made its way toward the pier. The harbor loomed larger as they neared the shipping containers, towering like silent sentinels. They parked at the perimeter where a small group of officers stood waiting, their eyes scanning the area. Vans led the way, his hand on his weapon, as they moved toward a security checkpoint. Coast Guard Vans announced to the guard, showing his badge. "We've got a situation. Need to get to the eastern horizon now." The guard didn't hesitate, recognizing the urgency in the detective's tone. "The ship's still docked," he said, pointing toward the far side of the harbor. "But they're preparing to leave any minute. You need to move fast." Vans nodded to the officers. "Get ready. Ethan, stay behind me. We move quickly." The tension in the air was palpable as they made their way through the maze of containers and machinery, each step bringing them closer to the eastern horizon. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Was his mother on board? The weight of the question felt unbearable, but he had to know. He couldn't let this be the last chance. As they approached the ship, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. There was no turning back now. Vans signaled to his team, and the officers dispersed to cover the surrounding areas. Ethan followed closely behind his eyes, scanning the ship. It looked like any other freighter, large and imposing against the backdrop of the darkening sky. But it was what was inside that mattered, the truth of his mother's disappearance, buried beneath years of lies. A door to the cargo hold opened, and 2 guards stepped out. They eyed the group warily. "This area is off limits," one of the guards said, his hand going to his waist. "We're with the Coast Guard," Vans said quickly, flashing his badge again. "We've got a search warrant for the vessel. You'll need to step aside." The guards exchanged a quick glance before reluctantly stepping back. Vans motioned to Ethan. "This is it. Stay close and don't make a sound." Ethan nodded, his throat dry. Every instinct told him to run, to push forward and find her, but he knew this had to be done carefully. One wrong move could jeopardize everything. They moved inside the ship, the air thick with the smell of salt water and the rust of metal. The narrow corridors felt like a maze, and Ethan's anxiety only deepened as they navigated their way through. At the far end, they reached a locked door. Vans gestured to one of the officers, who moved forward and expertly unlocked it. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he stepped inside. It was the same makeshift workroom from the surveillance footage, the room where the women had been sitting working at computer terminals. But this time, there was no one there. The silence was deafening. Vans stepped forward, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "Clear the room," he ordered. The officers moved quickly, checking every corner, every closet. But there was no sign of his mother or anyone else. Ethan's heart sank. He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the empty space. But then something caught his attention there in the corner. Half hidden beneath a pile of discarded clothes was a duffel bag. His fingers trembled as he reached for it. He pulled it open, revealing clothes, a few personal items, but then something else. A small, sealed envelope. Ethan opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a piece of paper, a simple note written in his mother's unmistakable handwriting. His heart skipped a beat as he read the words. "I never wanted you to know. I did it for you. They made me. Forgive me, Ethan." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes. The truth was finally in his hands, but it wasn't the truth he'd wanted. It wasn't the reunion he had dreamed of. His mother hadn't just disappeared. She had been forced into a life she never wanted, a life that had bound her to Doss and his operation. The ship's engines roared to life, and the moment Ethan had feared was finally upon him. They were leaving, and his mother was still out there somewhere. Ethan Vans shouted from the doorway, "We've got to go now." But Ethan couldn't move. His mother's words, written so many years ago, hung in the air. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, but the mystery wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The hunt for his mother had intensified, but so had the danger, and the truth was far darker than he could have imagined.